Hey everyone, something happened recently in Washington that's got people on both sides of the political spectrum talking. And honestly, it's one of those moments that makes you stop and wonder if we're witnessing a turning point in American politics. When a prominent member of Congress decides to walk away, especially someone as vocal and controversial as this particular representative, it's never just a simple career decision. It's a statement. And in this case, that statement is echoing through the halls of power in ways that could reshape the entire political landscape before anyone was ready for it. But here's what makes this situation truly fascinating. There are layers to this story that go far beyond the headlines. There are whispers of discontent, strategic calculations, and a growing fracture within one of America's major political parties that nobody saw coming. And once you understand the full picture, you'll realize why political insiders are calling this a potential earthquake moment. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you something that goes to the heart of this story. Should elected officials prioritize their principles even when it means defying their own party leadership? Or is there greater value in maintaining unity, even when you disagree behind closed doors? This isn't just an abstract debate. It's the tension at the center of what's happening right now in Congress. Drop your thoughts in the comments because this conversation matters, and your perspective adds to the larger discussion we're all navigating together. Let's get into what actually happened. When the resignation announcement came through, political reporters were scrambling. This wasn't on anyone's radar. Sure, there had been tensions brewing for months, but few predicted it would escalate to this point. Within hours of the news breaking, something else started happening. Republican lawmakers, speaking on condition of anonymity, began telling journalists that the mood inside their caucus is darker than it's been in years. Some used words like demoralized and defeated. Others went further, suggesting that this resignation might be the first domino in a series of departures that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in Congress. Think about what that means. When members of a political party start using language like that about their own caucus, it's not just gossip. It's a warning sign that the foundation underneath the entire operation is less stable than it appears from the outside. At the heart of this resignation lies a very public feud with the party's most powerful figure. This wasn't a private disagreement handled behind closed doors. This was a full-throated public confrontation over policy, principles, and who gets to define what the party stands for. The breaking point came over a controversial vote regarding classified information that some members believed the American people deserved to see. This representative was one of only 4 from their party to break ranks and vote with the opposition to force transparency. The backlash was swift and brutal. The party leader didn't just express disappointment. They went nuclear. Social media attacks, public denunciations, the withdrawal of political support, a direct statement claiming that this representative owed their entire career to the leader's endorsement and would be nothing without it. For anyone paying attention to political dynamics, this was a clear message. Dissent will not be tolerated. Fall in line or face the consequences. Here's where the story gets more complex. Political analysts who have been tracking this representative's voting record and public statements point out that this wasn't an isolated incident. There had been a gradual but noticeable drift away from the party's dominant faction over time. There were disagreements about immigration policy, particularly regarding visa programs that certain tech industry leaders favored. There were concerns about the influence of corporate donors on party priorities. There were questions raised about healthcare policy during critical moments. There were even critiques of foreign policy decisions that others in the party treated as untouchable. Each of these disagreements, taken individually, might seem minor, but together they paint a picture of someone who increasingly felt like they were in the wrong place. someone who believed the party had changed, or perhaps that they had changed, and the gap between personal conviction and party loyalty had become too wide to bridge. The resignation letter itself was remarkable. 4 full pages of dense, pointed criticism that didn't hold back. It wasn't a polite, "I'm moving on to spend time with family" statement. It was a manifesto, the core argument. Both major political parties have been captured by corporate interests and global elites who don't represent the concerns of everyday Americans. Congress as an institution is fundamentally broken. The performative political theater continues while real people struggle with rising costs, stagnant wages, and declining opportunity. Now, you might agree with that assessment, or you might think it's completely off base. But here's what's undeniable. Millions of Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, feel exactly what this letter describes. They see politicians arguing on cable news while their rent keeps climbing. They watch legislative battles that seem disconnected from their actual lives. They wonder if anyone in Washington actually cares about their daily struggles. That's why this letter resonated, not because everyone agrees with this particular representative's politics, but because the underlying frustration is something many people recognize in their own lives. In the days following the resignation announcement, something else interesting happened. Political reporters started receiving calls and messages from other Republican members of Congress, most speaking anonymously because they feared retaliation. The themes that emerged from these conversations were striking. Morale has never been this low in my time here. The White House treats us like rubber stamps, not like a co-equal branch of government. We're supposed to be legislators, but we're really just messengers delivering whatever the president wants. More people are thinking about leaving. This won't be the last resignation. These aren't outsider critics. These are sitting members of Congress describing their own experience in their own caucus. That level of public dissatisfaction, even when voiced anonymously, suggests something deeper than normal political disagreements. Here's where things get really interesting from a practical standpoint. Right now, Republicans hold a very narrow majority in the House of Representatives. We're talking about a margin of just a handful of seats. If you do the math, it means that if just 3 or 4 more Republicans were to resign before the next scheduled election, control of the House could flip to Democrats. Not through an election, not through voters making a decision, but simply through attrition. Imagine what that would mean. The entire legislative agenda would change overnight. Committee chairmanships would flip. Investigative priorities would shift. The president's ability to pass legislation would be fundamentally altered, all without a single ballot being cast. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy recognized the gravity of this situation. He described this resignation as the canary in the coal mine, suggesting it's an early warning sign of a more significant collapse in party cohesion. Other Republicans have been even more pessimistic. Some have privately told reporters that they believe they're headed for minority status in the next election anyway. So the internal dysfunction is just accelerating the inevitable. When elected officials start talking like that about their own prospects, it tells you something important about the psychological state of the organization. Now, here's a detail that many people missed initially, but becomes relevant when you consider the full context. The resignation was set for a very specific date, January 5th, 2026. Why that date? Well, here's an interesting fact about congressional pensions. Members need to serve 5 full years to qualify for their full retirement benefits, and January 5th happens to be exactly 3 days after this representative crosses that 5-year threshold. The representative didn't publicize this detail or make it part of the resignation narrative, but it's there in the public record for anyone who cares to look. You can interpret this however you want. Some see it as smart financial planning, someone making sure they're taken care of before walking away from a stable career. Others see it as a bit ironic given the harsh criticisms of how the political system serves insiders over ordinary Americans. Still others think it's a complete non-issue, just someone being practical about their future security. Regardless of your interpretation, it does raise an interesting question about the gap between political rhetoric and personal decision-making. Political observers are already speculating about what comes next, not just for the party, but for this individual representative. At 51 years old, with a devoted base of supporters and demonstrated ability to command media attention, could this resignation be a stepping stone rather than an ending? Some analysts are suggesting we might be looking at a future presidential candidate. The resignation speech had all the hallmarks of a campaign announcement: criticism of the establishment, promises to fight for forgotten Americans, positioning as an outsider willing to take on a broken system. If economic conditions don't improve significantly, if political polarization continues to intensify, if voters continue to feel disconnected from traditional party structures, then someone positioned as an anti-establishment fighter could find a receptive audience. We've seen this playbook before. Leave the institution, maintain your platform, build your narrative, and return on your own terms with even more political capital than you had before. Whether that's the actual plan remains to be seen, but the possibility is real enough that political strategists are already gaming out scenarios. Stepping back from the individual story, what we're really watching is a political party grappling with fundamental questions about its identity and direction. And these aren't easy questions with simple answers. The coalition that brought electoral success has always been somewhat fragile, built on groups with different priorities who were willing to work together toward common goals. But those fault lines are becoming harder to ignore. You have economic nationalists who prioritize American workers in manufacturing. You have free market conservatives who prioritize business growth and limited regulation. You have social conservatives focused on cultural issues. You have libertarians who want government to shrink across the board. You have defense hawks who support strong military intervention. You have isolationists who think America should pull back from global engagement. For years, strong leadership and external threats kept these factions working together despite their differences. But now, with one party controlling both Congress and the presidency, those internal contradictions are harder to paper over. Policy decisions that please one faction anger another. Loyalty demands that strengthen the leader's control alienate members who value institutional independence. The aggressive use of executive power that energizes the base concerns those who worry about long-term constitutional implications. If you're watching this and thinking, okay, but what does this mean for my actual life? That's exactly the right question to ask. Congressional dysfunction isn't just an abstract political problem, it has real consequences for real people. When Congress is consumed by internal battles and leadership struggles, legislative productivity grinds to a halt. Bills that could help working families don't get hearings. Programs that need funding face uncertainty. Long-term challenges get ignored in favor of short-term political survival. If the House majority does flip through resignations rather than elections, we'd see an immediate shift in priorities. Different issues would get attention. Different policies would advance. Different investigations would proceed. For someone worried about Social Security benefits, or Medicare coverage, or infrastructure in their community, or education funding, or agricultural support, or small business loans, all of that depends on who controls Congress and what they choose to prioritize. Political instability at the top creates policy uncertainty throughout the system, and that uncertainty affects business decisions, investment decisions, personal planning decisions, and ultimately the economic security of millions of families. There's another dimension to this story that doesn't always make the headlines, but matters enormously: the economic pressures facing the coalition that brought the current governing party to power. Farmers in rural America, traditionally strong supporters of the party, are dealing with tariff policies that make it harder to export their products to international markets. What was sold as protecting American agriculture has, in some cases, led to lost markets and falling prices. Small business owners who celebrated tax cuts are now navigating an unpredictable regulatory environment where rules seem to change based on political favor rather than consistent principle. Manufacturing workers who were promised a renaissance of American production are seeing mixed results, with some industries thriving while others struggle with supply chain disruptions and changing trade relationships. Even some labor unions that initially supported certain trade policies are reconsidering as the economic impacts become clearer and more complex than anyone anticipated. When the people who brought you to power start feeling economic pain, political fortunes can shift quickly. And right now, there are enough warning signs in enough different sectors to make strategists nervous. Here's something that rarely gets mentioned in traditional political coverage, but is becoming increasingly important: the growing tension between certain political movements and the technology industry. Some of the party's most vocal members have raised concerns about the influence of tech billionaires on policy decisions, particularly around immigration, regulation, and government contracts. They worry that what started as a populist movement is being co-opted by wealthy elites with their own agendas. Others in the party see the tech industry as crucial allies, providing both the financial resources and the communication platforms necessary for modern political success. This tension isn't going away. If anything, it's likely to intensify as questions about artificial intelligence, data privacy, content moderation, and tech monopolies become more prominent in public discourse. The resignation we've been discussing touched on exactly this issue, with the representative expressing frustration about corporate influence overriding the interests of ordinary citizens. That's a message that resonates with a certain segment of the electorate, and it's one that other politicians are watching carefully. Based on conversations with political analysts and strategists, there are roughly 3 paths forward from this moment. Scenario 1: containment and recovery. The party leadership recognizes the warning signs, makes strategic adjustments, and works to shore up morale and unity. Perhaps some policy compromises, perhaps more attention to member concerns, perhaps a recalibration of how power is exercised. In this scenario, the resignation becomes an isolated incident rather than the start of a trend. Scenario 2: gradual erosion. More resignations follow, but slowly enough that the party maintains its majority through the next election cycle. However, the internal dysfunction continues, leading to legislative gridlock and declining public approval. The party holds power but can't effectively use it, leading to voter frustration and eventual electoral losses. Scenario 3: rapid collapse. Multiple resignations happen in quick succession, control of the House flips before the next scheduled election, and the party descends into a full-scale civil war between competing factions. This would be the most dramatic outcome, essentially a realignment happening in real time. Nobody knows for certain which scenario will play out, but the fact that all 3 are considered plausible by serious political observers tells you something about the precarious nature of the current moment. Zooming out even further, what we're witnessing isn't entirely unique to one party or one moment. American political history is full of these inflection points where parties fracture, realign, and reconstitute themselves around new coalitions and new ideas. The Whigs collapsed in the 1850s over slavery. The Democrats split between northern and southern wings in the mid-20th century over civil rights. The Republicans went through their own identity crisis in the 1960s and again in the 1990s. These transformations are often painful, chaotic, and unpredictable while they're happening, but they're also how the political system adapts to changing circumstances, new challenges, and shifting public priorities. Maybe we're living through one of those transformative moments right now. Maybe the party structures that made sense a decade ago don't adequately represent the coalitions and conflicts that define contemporary American politics. If that's the case, then this resignation isn't just about one person leaving Congress. It's about the beginning of a larger reconfiguration of how political power is organized and exercised in this country. Here's something that often gets lost in coverage of high-level political drama. Individual voices and local action still matter enormously. When members of Congress feel disconnected from their constituents, they become more vulnerable to pressure from party leadership, donors, and interest groups. But when they hear consistently from real people in their districts about what matters to them, it changes the calculation. If you care about these issues, not just the political drama, but the underlying questions about representation, accountability, and whose interests are being served, the most effective thing you can do is engage at the local level. That means town halls, constituent services, local party meetings, school board sessions, city council hearings. It means building relationships with people who share your concerns and working together on concrete problems in your community. National politics is important, but it's also often paralyzing in its scale and complexity. Local engagement is where individual citizens actually have leverage to create change. The resignation we've been discussing happened because one member of Congress decided that the gap between their principles and their party's direction had become too wide to bridge. But that decision was influenced by countless conversations with constituents, pressure from various factions, and calculations about what kind of political future seemed possible. Your participation in that process matters more than you probably realize. As we wrap up, I want to be clear about one thing. This story isn't over, not even close. We're watching events unfold in real time, and the ultimate significance of this resignation won't be clear for months or even years. History is being written right now, and we don't yet know how the final chapter will read. What we do know is that something significant is happening beneath the surface of American politics. Coalitions are shifting, loyalties are being tested, long-held assumptions about party unity and political strategy are being challenged. Whether you see this as a crisis or an opportunity probably depends on your political perspective. But either way, it's a moment worth paying attention to. The decisions being made in Washington right now about leadership, about policy, about what it means to represent the American people will shape the political landscape for years to come. So stay engaged, ask questions, demand accountability, make your voice heard. Because in a democracy, the most dangerous thing isn't political conflict or institutional struggle. It's apathy and disengagement. The story continues, and in some small way, we're all participants in how it unfolds. Thanks for taking the time to think through this with me. Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this with someone who might find it interesting, and let's keep the conversation going, because that's ultimately what democracy is, an ongoing conversation about who we are, what we value, and what kind of future we want to build together.